There's a problem with overpopulation and how many people we have to feed. And this is an issue that's really difficult when we talk about it in peak oil because we tend to have very gloomy ideas about what may happen because of that. So it's a pretty scary issue, and it's an elephant in the living room, as they say.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson, and we're in the city of San Francisco. I'm with two peak oil activists who've been paying attention to peak oil for a few years. We're going to address some of the concerns you have that we don't often voice out loud in public. I'm with Richard Katz, Dennis Broom. Thanks for joining me. Okay, Richard, what's the stuff we aren't hearing sort of out in the public that's concerning you about peak oil climate change?
Well, there's really a lot going on, and there are a lot of issues that are just verboten that people won't address that they need to. For example, the techno-fix delusion. You know, people drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking that there's a technological solution, that there's something to replace something as remarkable and as unique as petrochemical oil.
This portable, cheap, liquid, highly dense energy stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Remarkable and unique.
Well, we're touting hydrogen. I mean, the president is touting hydrogen and biodiesel and ethanol.
There's ideas of using algae to make hydrogen as well. A lot of things which will work maybe in a petri dish or in a small area, but when you try to scale them up, they just don't work. Or there's no time to scale them up if we were actually going to try to do it, because the infrastructure is so vast and so precarious because of peak oil that we have.
The infrastructure, you mean that we have now, that we use oil everywhere for everything.
Yeah.
And it's not flexible. This is what it does. It distributes oil. It distributes natural gas. You don't turn a natural gas distribution system into a hydrogen system. And hydrogen is the ultimate check in the mail. Promise that's almost entirely empty at this point. And
speaking of the hydrogen, from my understanding, is that the idea is there, but there's a lot of research yet to be done to make that even deployable. There's concerns about safety. It's explosive, and right now, that it's being created using fossil fuels.
Exactly.
Right. So we're not independent of the fossil fuels.
And the amount of electricity it takes to do it the other way, which is substantial. So you're going to have to generate the electricity, and the easiest way and the most probable way we will generate electricity is with clean coal. And
so what you're saying to me is coal, even if we gasify it and the other things they're doing, we can't clean it fully.
There's some real issues with trying to sequester carbon down in the ground. It's just a vast amount of carbon that would be done. It's not sure that it could actually be done yet. So it's just another sort of pipe dream they're using as an excuse to start using coal, which they're doing more and more.
Well, we have a great deal of coal, so
sure, that would be the natural thing to turn to.
Right.
It was what we turned away from because it's so unbelievably filthy and it's energy intensive to get to.
But if oil and gas, which are declining, are down, it's like we're desperate, right?
Yep.
What are we going to do?
Well, exactly.
How are we going to keep those cars moving and the engines of industry moving?
Well, we're also trying to use our farmland to grow gasoline, basically.
Or fuel.
So we're turning the price of food has gone up. In Brazil, sugar has gone up from their ethanol process, which is actually a lot more efficient than the way we're doing it with corn most of the time here. That's all dependent, too, upon using natural gas as fertilizer to replenish the soil. If you take all of the corn or the switchgrass or anything off of the soil for an extended period of time, the soil will deteriorate and not grow food. And without natural gas fertilizers, we're going to be back, again, we're still using fossil fuels to create this. So these products have either a very low return of energy versus what's put into them, or else a negative return, and yet we're promoting this. The government gives all this money to farmers to grow corn for this, so it's
So what you're saying
subsidized.
is, by the time you get the whole picture of how much fossil fuel used to put into the fertilizers and the tractors and the transport and so on, we're getting either very little or nothing, or we're losing energy in producing ethanol.
And in doing that, if we were to actually do it, first of all, I think if we used all of our farmland in the country, we would still only produce something like 25% of the gasoline we do now.
I've heard that. It's
But-
like,
Yeah, it's
which
not
means
very much.
either eat or we fuel a quarter of our vehicles.
And you want to think about it, ethanol is nowhere near as energy dense as gasoline, so you have to put more in, considerably more in, just to get the same distance out of a vehicle. And so,
Which means bigger tanks or more close-up fuel
and
ups
it
or whatever.
means more farmland still.
Any of these fixes that are designed to replace fossil fuels, at the moment, they have such a low return on the energy investment in them, the EROEI as we call it, for people who are in peak oil for a while, we all have heard this term, that we would have something at one point, I heard a statistic like 80% of our population would have to be working, generating energy just to get enough energy for us to use.
Wow.
Because of the low EROEI, you need
The
more
low
people
return.
working in the industry. So
I mean, everything has an opposite effect. Everything you do has some other component that goes on. I push you, you lean back. If you're growing the ethanol, I mean, as Dennis mentioned, what's happening in Brazil right now, the price of sugar is shooting up because that's what they're growing it
would
from.
actually say is that probably makes people healthier, but
No,
that's a
but
side
that's
point.
really a side point because this is what there is I think a relatively high probability of happening over time if we buy into this is that Americans will be driving on the starvation of the third world, and we'll be, and it's not a pretty picture, but this is
What
the
you're
price
saying
of
is that
not,
we would be importing lots of sugar to use for
We'd be
ethanol or
importing
whatever.
processed materials.
And I know the concern about palm oils for biodiesel that they're now importing from Southeast Asia and decimating the forests to replace them with the palm oil trees. It's like, that's a very sobering thing you're saying, that in order to feed and fuel America, we would be doing it on the starving of people elsewhere in the world. So social justice just went down.
Absolutely. You turn your key and someone's hurting from it. And that, I think there's a good possibility that we're going to do that in spite of the fact that even mainstream journals like Consumer Reports have questioned the viability of something like ethanol.
biodiesel is an interesting topic too because it comes in two forms. There's the recycling form of people using grease and oil from McDonald's and places like that.
Right.
And then we're growing soybeans in this country and they're doing the palm oil in Malaysia or wherever. When they start taking away land again to grow food and they're cutting down forests to do it there, it becomes very problematic. Once again, we're messing with our food supply just in order to have a fuel to power an automobile. And most people just don't want to think about the idea of what life would be like without our individual transportation vehicles. And
I hear that everywhere. I hear it's like, well, we'll just swap out. It might take a while, and so on. But when I drive through the freeways coming to San Francisco, 5 lanes wide, full of traffic, and I just look at the scale of the number of vehicles and know that that's repeated in cities all over the world, I think it's inconceivable to me how to work with that kind of scale of change.
yeah, there's certainly not enough McDonald's even to,
No.
there are a lot, there's not enough McDonald's to produce enough fuel, recycled grease for all the cars in this country or anywhere else.
Right now, McDonald's in Southern California, the oil isn't staying here anymore. It's now being shipped to Southern California where they're reprocessing it for
biodiesel?
Yeah, for fuel.
So there are going to be McDonald's biodiesel plants, which is an interesting.
Golden Arches go in and grab your McGas and your
McBurger.
burger.
Oh my goodness.
With or without cheese.
So what I want to go.
The gas or the
I want to go to the question of scale here because I think that's what I keep getting boggled by when I think about the metropolitan area of San Francisco, say, or Seattle or Vancouver, and I think, how will we feed all those people given that our food is coming not just from the Central Valley, where we're fortunate to have a good deal of growing in California, but across the world? I mean, how, and we're paving, continue to pave and pave and pave.
And take away farmland and make suburbia expand and so forth, yeah. There's a problem with overpopulation and how many people we have to feed. And this is an issue that's really difficult when we talk about it in peak oil, because we tend to have very gloomy ideas about what may happen because of that, and including die-offs, or at least very difficult life for people for a long time, until population were at a more reasonable level that
Yes.
the Earth could sustain it without the use of this dense petroleum that we now use. So it's a pretty scary issue, and it's an elephant in the living room, as they say.
It's the elephant in the living room.
It's one of several, but
Yes, it's a
That's
very
true.
nasty one, because politicians will not take this on. You cannot expect anyone who ever wants to get reelected to bring the subject up. And yet,
Of population.
Yet the carrying capacity of the Earth is much, much, much smaller than the population we presently have. And we're talking, perhaps the optimistic numbers are below 25% of the population of the Earth now. How do we get from here to there with minimal suffering versus enormous suffering is really the question.
It seems-
I mean, and just frame the carrying capacity subject for a second. What we're doing by using up the oil and using up the resources is we're taking the resources in present time away from other animal and plant systems,
Yes.
and we're taking it away from the future, from plant systems, human systems, all systems in the future. There's a very finite amount of resource, and it's all ultimately distilled sunlight in one form or
Sure.
another that we're
Yes,
talking about,
yes,
unless we
yes.
can chew and prosper, glow from radium. Exactly, right. And this book, which I brought along, interestingly enough, called Overshoot, which I read many, many years ago, is the most interesting. This is by a guy named William Catton.
Okay.
Is the most interesting on the subject of animal systems, and sorts of puts us in a more reasonable relationship to the environment. Doesn't separate us. And if you see us
Yes.
as simply a parallel animal system,
All right.
then suddenly our behaviors start making a lot more sense, and it's not a pretty picture what we may be experiencing, because we have so far overshot what we have, the carrying capacity of the Earth.
So if we put it in the context of other animal systems, meaning if the population of whatever, mice in a particular area gets too large, what happens? Tell us.
Exactly, and what
they
happens?
either have to find a new place to live, or they will starve to death because they won't have enough food.
Okay.
And
so
if we don't have the ability to grow food the way we are now, and we keep losing land to it, and we're losing it to diesel or whatever else it could be, and just general not taking care of it as we haven't for the last 100 years or so, it's very likely that we're going to have a food and population problem combined. And this is, as petroleum gets more and more expensive and too expensive to use for the things we use it for now.
And then the costs of food, of course, go up. You think about 50% of natural gas is used in the fertilization, transportation, primarily fertilization of food growth. In growing food, the soils are so depleted of anything real. They're effectively damp cardboard that we're dumping stuff into. We're dumping nutrients into in the form of petronutrients to grow things, and so if the cost of those things, and natural gas is another one that's right up there, we're going to have problems. We may see
it's already in decline in North America.
And we
know
may
that.
see, like in Europe this winter, someone mentioned
Some real problems.
we may see some real problems with the natural gas distribution in Europe, and we're down on the line to having some real issues ourselves in the United States on
So
natural gas
I knew that
availability.
even the last season, just having enough natural gas to make the fertilizers, and the prices are going up because after Katrina a year ago, was making it tougher for farmers to even make a living, and we're thinking of not planting. I mean, the pressures are everywhere.
Yes, they come from a lot of sides. And it's interesting you said a while ago that we do have farmland not too far away that's very productive. Not too awfully long ago, I was watching a show on television that was talking about the Roman Empire and at its height and decline, but at one point they said that it was cheaper for them to grow their food in Egypt and use wind power on boats to bring it to Rome than to get it from 100 miles inland. So without the transportation sort of system we have functioning, even Sacramento is a long ways away. I mean,
well, we can get wind power going up the valley, but that doesn't get it down to South San Jose or Santa Cruz or inland places.
Not to
wind
mention
power
pumping
is
and
for
getting-
electricity, though, not necessarily for transportation. I mean, if we did have electrified trains, yes, but it's another infrastructure thing we do not have nor have any
The electric trains.
And
hope of at the
distance.
moment of having in the whole country. I mean, it would be a great thing for us to begin with.
And electrification has its own bugaboos, another fix with issues, which include the
Yes,
fact
yes.
that basically distance is the big enemy of energy transmission.
Yes,
And
yes.
so-
You lose some, I mean, the loss,
Oh,
when
the
you look at
losses are
how
great.
little you get out of how much you generate by the long line losses, the transmission lines, which say you've got to do your electricity generation locally or, in a region. I mean, so San Francisco should have what? Wind towers and tidal and
Local generation is
sun and so on.
a cool place to go. But you have to remember the relative energy values of different sources. So, for example, I have an ex-business partner who lives in Dennis's home state of Iowa, and when Matt would start up his big toy car, it looked like a Tonka toy. This thing, and he'd drive it a block. He basically offset days of my solar panels on my house generating electricity because the energy density of gasoline is
Yes.
so great.
Yes, yes.
And natural gas is
pretty close to that,
so
too. No, I
it's
remember
also
when
very
Richard
rich.
Heinberg says, in this gallon of gas is enough to take and push that car, your car, 30, 20, whatever miles. You think about what energy it takes, human energy it takes to do 20 miles to push this heavy car. That's a lot. I understand. We're on solar, and we calculated that we could probably go all of 1 mile on what it takes, on our set of panels. It's very much less efficient.
Right, and costly.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so you can't expect that everyone can do this either.
When-
And there's the big rub about this.
Well, sure, we can't afford. I mean, everybody can't afford or don't have the right locations and so on. So,
So-
what are we in some kind of? We can't. I mean, an insoluble.
Well, I don't believe there's an
Problem?
actual solution to peak oil and what it's going to do. I mean, there may be ways to mitigate it, and there may be ways that you can work on it individually and help yourself get through it. But I'm not even sure those are for certain because it's so hard to predict what really will happen or what would happen. And anytime you try to predict what will happen tomorrow, you'll be wrong. So looking
Yes.
out 5 or
Yes.
10 years makes
Yes.
it's just about as bad, or I mean, it's much worse, actually.
Yes. Dennis and I were talking about this on the way over here, is the issue of pundits saying this is the way it's going to be. And so these, the few scenarios we've sort of put forth in the vaguest of terms are vague because that's the wisest position you can take. Otherwise, you're going to be wrong. There's no way you can follow all the branches into the future. What do they say on TV when they're promoting stock investments? Something about these are
Past performance is
does
no
not-
guarantee of future
Exactly.
returns.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And we've all lived long enough to see that the things that have been invented and how life has changed, even in 50 years, none of us could have guessed most of them.
Right.
Yeah.
If you look at science fiction movies from the 50s or 60s, you'll see how wrong they were about so many things. When,
Well, we've got the Dick Tracy two-way radio.
Right.
It's called the cell phone, but we've gotten
Well,
that.
that's
But
more
that's
like-
one of the few, right?
that's sort of like from Star Trek too, when there was
That's
the
right.
communicators.
He
Everybody.
was aboard, Scotty.
But everything comes with a
Right.
plus and a minus.
Yes, yes.
Cell phones too. So.
Yes.
One of the-
Yes.
So the quality of the transmission is crappy compared to everything. Nothing, you don't get anything for free. So the question comes back, circling this back, to what can people expect and what could we do to move forward?
This is
There.
right where I had some ideas. That's what I think you need to learn to live with is the idea that there really isn't security. I mean, it's an
There's
illusion.
not, wait a minute, security.
There
is an
really
illusion,
isn't
which
security.
we-
Nothing is secure. We have it as an illusion. The government tries to sell it to us by taking away civil rights or whatever they're doing at the moment. But in reality, there isn't. At any second, we could have an earthquake. We could have, something could happen. So if you live with that, and it keeps you from being so neurotic if you just sort of accept it, I think. And beyond that, our lives are going to change. I think that's one thing I would predict. No matter what, I don't see a way that they won't, because my life has certainly changed over the course of my lifetime, and I think there's no way around what's going to happen with fossil fuels. So we need to make preparations on whatever level that does. If you can do things for yourself now so you won't be blindsided when you have no choice, I think it makes it a little easier. That's what I try to do in my own life. So.
And he does remarkable things, and maybe you'll want to ask him what he's practicing.
What are you doing?
Because he's one of the few people I know who's actually practicing what he preaches on a pretty large scale.
Well, 2 years ago, I began living without heat, which in San Francisco is possible. It's not,
not
Iowa,
everywhere.
where I come from.
That's right.
No, and I've gotten rid of two things I really loved, which are aquariums. I've had all my life because I decided they were just using energy for the sake of energy, and those are that's been sort of hard. I don't get in automobiles unless I'm sick or have to, or it's a particularly dire reason.
Don't own one.
I don't own a car,
right.
And I recently gave up my driver's license and switched just to a California ID, so I can't even drive one now. So there's less reason for people to say, drive my car or something. I can't do it. It seems like there's several more things I've been doing. But
I mean, Dennis is genuinely walking the walk, and in actuality, for most people, I think that if there's a prediction into the future, is that we have to accept that we are going to be living with a lot less, and that our children's children will also have a lot less. So the question is, what are you going to replace that with? So that your TV, which is indoctrinating you to go out to a mall and just consume, which is substitution for something that could generate real happiness. I don't know what that is. It's subjective with different people. But what do you really replace it for? Dennis, Dennis has always had piles of friends, but Dennis's social world, his circle, is very large, and that's a big component, I think, of.
So what we're seeing here is people could look at this whole situation with, doom and gloom, and we're going to be impoverished materially, and the whole. But this is counter to the whole American message, or the message of Western capitalism, at least, is like grow or die. All the corporations have to keep growing, as the population has, as consumption has, and so everything that the messages are all buy more, shop more. This will make you happy.
So extricating yourself from all of that is kind of important.
That's a big part of the step, and finding if there are other things, then what else makes you happy other than going down and buying another something.
Well, the fix of buying something tends to be really temporary anyway.
Yes.
Exceedingly so.
That's why you have to buy more.
So we've got an addictive situation here. We've got people addictively eating or consuming more in various forms, buying more things. So you've gotten yourself off the addiction wheel in many ways.
As best you can. And for me, I'm a consumer of food. I'm a serious consumer of food. I'm also I was a serious consumer of tchotchkes, of things.
Stuff, okay.
Yeah, and living in the techno world in the San Francisco Bay Area with all the technology, this was just the sweet spot, from computers to all the other junk. And one of the things you can do if you want to start weaning yourself away is, instead of going shopping for new stuff, go to thrift stores.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that
So we
told you we'd
start
try to bring something positive here into this.
Yeah, yes.
And you know what? If you can basically say, okay, I can buy today top-notch stuff of 20 years ago, what exactly are you losing? Maybe in computers there are issues, but my living room has a stereo that's probably 30 years old that I picked up for under $30, and the speakers were another $10. Right. My TV upstairs has all the fancy stuff and all the speakers. The subwoofer, everything is all out of the thrift stores.
So that's one of the first steps in that transition, is a kind of
even
simplifying.
Even if you're still a consumer, and I still am.
Consume on a lower tier, if you will.
Use stuff too, reusing stuff instead of buying it new. But consume on a lower level, and then turning it down. And Dennis has brought it way down.
I'm on disability because of some health issues, and that cut my income down immensely in 1999. So it was not even a choice particularly, but I was not a great, I mean, I consumed things if I wanted them, like for a computer or whatever. If I would use it, I did, but I never went and bought just for the sake of buying. So it wasn't as difficult. And I never really liked cars all that much, so even giving up them is not that hard for me. Some of the things that are hard for a lot of other people I found relatively painless. I found it's not that difficult to live without heat, so I don't know. The things I've tried to do just have worked pretty well for me so far. I still consume new media like DVDs or something if we're doing movies, or the stuff that we share among our groups. And I have 3 cats, and they are actually a drain on my footprint, but
yes.
they're at the moment a non-negotiable way of life.
Their relationship, and I think that's
Yeah.
what I want to point to here in our last 2 minutes we have, is that part of that substitution for the material stuff that we think will make us happy, it's about our relationships with our animals, with our places, with other people. And I think that's part of the hope, that's maybe the blessing side here, is being more closely related to one another as a value. I mean, isn't that what true family values are? Isn't that what, true social values are? Helping one another in times of need. And so the skills we have, I can sew and you know how to cook and you know how to can, and we can share some of that around. That's part of what I envision as the silver lining here.
And maybe the critical, if there's something to take away from this, is that the thing you can predict about the future is that just try to have as many skills as you can and be flexible, because whatever you plan, it's not going to turn out the way you planned it.
Yes.
And despite this being a very dire topic, I mean, we wouldn't have all known one another if it weren't for this.
That's exactly true. And I think that, like the last question of Americans, how do they turn the ship of their lives? I guess it starts with waking up and realizing it's going to be changing. It's going to be changing quickly. Who can you turn to? Who can you help? What resources do you have you work with? Can you grow a garden on your back deck in the city, or on your roof, or in your little, or down the way where somebody has a plot? I would think that little community gardens are going to start to be very important with us as it was with Cuba. So when the peak oil hit for them. Thank you both.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
me.
I think this is just going to be a part of an ongoing discussion, because it's going to be what's in our lives for the rest of our lives.
Exactly.
You're watching Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.